finding your tribe. Do people get you or don't they get you? And the way that I look at it is when I'll talk to somebody, and the real question is, are you offended by the right things? Are you offended by racism and sexism? Are you offended by economic inequality? Are you offended by people who are more than willing to trash the environment because another generation's going to have to deal with the aftermath? Or are you offended because somebody said fuck?
Welcome to Happy to Offend You. Life guarantees that somebody's going to be offended by anything that you do. In fact, somebody right now is offended by life itself, but they don't have to be. This show guarantees that someone is going to be liberated from being offended by somebody else's offensive behavior. What? Yes, we said it. This show sets out to prove not only how to be liberated from being offended, and also how to be happy to offend. So if you're already offended, welcome to the show. And here's your host of the very offensive, Michelle Nedelec. Hey there, peeps. This is Michelle Nedelec, and I'm super glad to have you here with us on Happy to Offend You, where we get to unravel the why behind the mystery, that just because you're offended by somebody doesn't mean that you're going to die. And in fact, if you can understand why they're not offended by their behavior, that we can actually create better connections and better world to live in. So I am here with my most amazingly offensive guest, Jim Shulman. Jim, thank you so much for being here with us today.
And happy to offend you.
Excellent. So give us a highlight of who you are and what you do for business.
Well, who I am is I am an inveterately curious person who has been involved in sales and marketing for over 40 years. And I have sold everything from auto restoration equipment to polyester pants. I think I created the do not call list based on my experience selling China to college women over the phone. And at one point, a company engaged me to sell natural herbal-based personal lubricants to fundamentalist Christian women. That one I didn't look for.
Sure you didn't. So hilarious. I love this. And in some ways, you've always kind of been in roles where, I mean, you've almost epitomized the sales role that people are going, oh no, I don't want to do that because that's going to offend somebody. I want to talk about that for a bit because one, I think it's hilarious. Two, I know that you were highly successful in it. Therefore, this whole idea or notion of offending people because you might come across as Herb Tarlick is just not in your repertoire at all. And if people, I think, can overcome that and understand the parameters, mindsets, the all sorts of fun things around that we can kind of demystify the role of a salesperson. And two, then we can get into what you're doing right now, because there's also some fascinating roles that you have in that world that people still find offensive, and it's just getting to the root of what's going on. So let's kind of back up the bus a little bit. You didn't
Well,
ask for the role of
I've
sales.
looked at it in two ways, Michelle. The first is this. As anyone who has some gray hair will almost always tell someone else, when they were younger, they were constantly concerned about, am I saying something that is going to offend somebody else or that it's not going to meet their expectations? And when they get older, they realize something vitally, vitally important is that nobody really cares. They're thinking about themselves. They're thinking about what's going on in their own head. And that realization, when you come to the conclusion that most of the world is not as preoccupied about it as you are, it's incredibly freeing. And by the way, one of the reasons I think companies typically will be more inclined to fire older workers is not necessarily because they're more expensive. In many cases, the expense isn't really a question. They want to get rid of them because they know enough not to put up with the bullshit from the company, because they've seen enough of it. And they've recognized that it's not worth their time. And organizations need people to nod and smile and say, yes, I understand, and I'll put up with this. The second part, which is vitally important, is finding your tribe. Do people get you or don't they get you? And the way that I look at it is when I'll talk to somebody, and the real question is, are you offended by the right things? Are you offended by racism and sexism? Are you offended by economic inequality? Are you offended by people who are more than willing to trash the environment because another generation's going to have to deal with the aftermath? Or are you offended because somebody said fuck? You know, that's the real issue. And the people who are offended by the wrong things, those are the people that save you time because you don't have to spend one more nanosecond with them than necessary.
Right. So other than dropping F-bombs around them, how do you differentiate kind of what category or tribe somebody's in?
Conversation, you find out, do they get you? Do they viscerally have, understand who you are, what you're about, how you care about them? And is it something where there's simpatico, where you can have a great working relationship? In my case, with Yamor, I exclusively work with successful entrepreneurs. Somebody starting out, God bless them, I might have a conversation briefly, and I would send them to another expert who's great at working with newbies. But in my case, when you work with a successful entrepreneur, the personal life and your professional life are one thing. The question is, am I spending more time on one versus another? And being an entrepreneur is a very rough, lonely road. And the people who have the guts to do it and do it consistently usually have it within themselves to know how to survive a rough life and what's really and truly important. And are they going to be with somebody who gets them as they go through this journey?
Nice. So and I want to go back to kind of when you were younger, because I think for young people listening to this, young at heart, young in spirit, who still worry about what other people think, and especially with the whole cancer culture on their back, that they don't know how to differentiate between what's important to worry about and what's not important to worry about. So how, as a young person that still is trying to find their people, how do they kind of navigate those waters of not caring what people think, but needing to still belong to a group of something, somewhere, somehow?
You start by knowing yourself. What are your values? What's important to you? What offends you? What excites you? Who are the types of people you like being with who, frankly, are in a position to make something happen? You know, the cliche about us being known or being formed by the 5 people we hang out with the most. The question I would ask somebody is, who are you hanging out with? Are you hanging out with people who are phonies, who are pretending to be more successful? For instance, you and I have been in a zillion different networking events where everybody is brilliant and they're charming. And they have just written an article that I call 4 passive-aggressive reasons to hire me right now. And you know that when you finish with one of those, back in the days when they had paper business cards, you'd come home and those business cards were great for flossing out the really tough piece of sausage that got stuck in your molar. But that was about it.
That's awesome. So let's move into the era or into the era of pomp and air, where I think people are so sick of going to networking events because of the pomp and air, because of the, like, I just don't want to put on a show. I don't want to have to put on a show. How do you navigate those waters?
Ooh, good question. Networking events. A networking event supports somebody else's dream. It's always there because it supports somebody else's dream, somebody else's MO of why they're doing it. The question is, does it support yours? Are there going to be people there who are in your target market where you stand a chance of making that time worthwhile? A step away, are there people in that networking event that work with folks directly who are in your target market that are complementary. And especially in that second category, there better be a lot of those. And there had better be ones that actually have a thriving business and are making it work. Because absent those two things, you shouldn't be there. And as an example, a couple of, at the beginning of the pandemic, I joined every online networking group I could find. And the vast majority of them were and filled, absolutely populated with other consultants, the majority of whom had all of the substance of a popover. It was for the most part complete air, or somebody who was a multi-level vitamin salesperson, or somebody else who was vaguely going to improve your outlook on the world, or something like that. They didn't fit those categories. But for the person running that organization or that event, probably great. For instance, let's say I was a financial advisor. If I had a room full of people like that, all of those folks typically had worked somewhere else, might have a spouse that worked somewhere else, might have 401ks to roll over, might have life insurance needs that need to be addressed, and so forth. Great for that person who organized the event. Not so great necessarily for the other people who were there. So a real question is, am I in the right place? The second thing is, and I'm going to use you as an example, did you create, or would you create, or should you create your own events? These podcasts are your events. These podcasts are a reflection of you and who you want to attract. And it is worth your effort because, quite frankly, putting on a first-rate podcast is a whole bunch of effort. And it's an effort that has to be done consistently. But the return is you are creating, finding, and nurturing your own audience. I could say curate, but I'd have to probably wash my brain out with sulfuric acid if I hear that again. So the easy way, I'm going to find somebody else who has events that I can glom onto. Are they probably going to be complete waste of my time? It depends on who's there.
So you had a unique way of getting through the mist and the fog of of Pompanair. How did you go about doing that?
Well, a couple of ways. One of the things that I had done about 2 years ago is I became a good friend of another consultant who was doing substantive, high quality work with corporate companies on corporate culture, where there were assessments. And when I say high quality, this fellow had run his own multi-million dollar companies. So it was not somebody who came in with a bunch of theory out of a workbook. This is what actually worked in his organizations. And the two of us hit it off immediately. The guy's name is Mark Iorio, an amazingly great professional. And we realized that we had the same low opinion of almost all networking events. And we said, usually at the end of the event, with the piece of $50 PVC chicken, the bad PowerPoint with a very rich person giving the PowerPoint, and a bunch of butt kissing questions afterwards about, oh, brilliant, wonderful, wealthy person. Let me tell you why I'm just like you. How many of those have we been through? A couple of people will go to the bar in the hotel and they'll talk about how things didn't work very well. My biggest customer went bankrupt. My partner stole $250,000. I wound up losing a major account because technology changed. So we said, why don't we have a TV show that's set in a bar with a bartender serving scotch, where we can have people just talking about failures that they've had. And so we started this television show, and it was called Fuck Ups, a celebration of failures, and ran
Love that.
38 episodes, and the fuck ups were mild to you've got to be kidding.
I love it.
So
I love it.
kind
I
of
love it. When so when you start the TV show, is the intention of it one to see the reality of business and people, but the celebration of the fuck ups is the fascinating part to me because to me, that's when you start getting at the root of who this person is and what they're made of, and how they came through the other side of the quagmire, because we all go through our quagmires, and to deny those quagmires is to me doing a disservice to the entire planet. To say, wow, you're not perfect enough for the rest of us, that's not going to work. It's like that's not any of us. None of
Well,
us
I
are
found,
perfect.
Michelle, that when I would describe the show, for instance, if you go into a typical networking room, what do? I do this, this, and this. Oh, aren't you wonderful? I do this, this, and this. This is great. Do you care about anybody else? No. I'm waiting to get to the point when I tell you about how brilliant and wonderful I am, and maybe I can figure out how to go and sell you on my brilliance and my wonderful. And you get this giant circular, I'll just say, stimulation circle. How's that? And I found that when I mentioned that I had a TV show called Fuck Ups, one of two reactions I would get. I would never go on something like that. What especially with a name like that. Or how soon can I go on your program? And the people who are in the latter group are the people I want to be with.
Right.
The people who have the humility and frankly the honesty to say, as you pointed out, this is what it's really like. And yet, if I can't laugh at doing something that was completely lousy, where I looked foolish in retrospect, where I trusted something I shouldn't have trusted, where I made bad judgments, and everybody gets on to the other side. And some of the topics were person in their early 20s who bought into some complete fako marketing program that was going to do all these amazing things for his company, went into debt on several credit cards, and this fako company turned into ether. They ghosted him as well as everybody else. And so now he had tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt at those lovely 20 and 30% APR rates that he had to pay off. And it took him several years to do that, but he made it through. And what he learned was, number one, magic bullets don't exist. And number two, you have to be very wary of anything requiring a large investment where there's not a significant track record.
Right. Yeah, that the the pains of those lessons to me is one fantastic and noteworthy, because I think the tendering process of entrepreneurs that go through those kind of things shows a certain level of epicness in hope and humanity. There's when it comes to people that find things offensive, that are just people, trying to do their thing and fucking up. Like, I get it. If you start a Ponzi scheme, yeah, that's offensive. You
Right,
should probably be
exactly.
shut down. And yeah, but I'm not going to get offended by it. I'm going to take action on it. So and it's not that, hey, I don't like the way you're doing business. It's like, no, that's totally illegal and you're scamming people.
Right.
So how do people find that kind of that fine line between being offended by something and I need to take action on this? Like, this is unacceptable.
You mean when they encounter something that's a fake like that and taking action against it?
Or something that's not necessarily fake, but in business, I mean, we come across things all the time. I can't tell you how many people I have talked to that said, oh, I took this coach and I paid them so much money and I got nothing out of it. And I'm so offended. Like, they shouldn't be allowed to be in business. It's like, well, did you do what they said to do? Like, come on, this is kind of a two-way street here. What do you got going on? So there's this kind of chasm between, I didn't do what I needed to do, but I'm really offended by what they didn't do because I lost money on it. And it was a total Ponzi scheme. Like, to me, there's a huge chasm in there. How do you
Well, one
differentiate?
of the things I remind people about coaching is that the barrier to entry is almost non-existent. It requires somebody to say, I'm a coach, and that's it. And there are places that, will say you're certified, although the question I have is, how is that? Who's making that decision? Is it meaningful to anybody other than the person who paid the money and got a piece of paper? Some people say yes, it depends on the situation. Um, though the question beyond that point is, did I do my due diligence and know who this person was and how they were going to help me and specifics about how it was going to get me to that point? In other words, was there a clear path to what I wanted to achieve? The second thing is, was I able, as the client, to clearly articulate what I wanted to get out of this relationship? And did the coach have the expertise and the ethics to say, this is what you're saying, this is what you need, this may or may not be suitable to your needs based upon what you just shared? I've had a few occasions over the past 2 decades where I would talk to somebody, we would hit it off immediately. We would have our first meeting, sometimes even our second meeting after the engagement began. And it was obvious that this was going to be a bomb. And usually it was because they had said one thing and tried to convince me of one thing at the outset of the relationship. And it very quickly appeared that that's not where their head was at or not where they wanted to go. And in those few cases, I can think of like two right off that, I just returned the money. And I said, this is not going to be an effective relationship with the two of us. I think your investment would be better directed at, with somebody else. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
I love it. So let's talk about the clientele that you're working with right now. And first off, give us kind of a bit of background. Who's your ideal client and or who comes to you the most?
All right, ideal client is somebody who founded their own enterprise. They are already quite successful, in other words, well into six figures personally. They have at least one employee. And there are a couple of reasons why I like that. Number one is, for those of you who have businesses, there was your life before employees and after employees. And the issues to deal with are far richer and more complicated and frankly interesting and challenging once the person has employees. But I think most critically, somebody who has an employee has already demonstrated that they are investing in themselves, in their business, and they understand the value of that. So it's not much more of a leap to work with an advisor because they already understand the necessity and value of having assistance and investing in assistance. The other part too is that the people I work with are incredibly ambitious. They're never really satisfied. And they usually are ADD. They have 1,000 different directions. They have 1,000 different great ideas that they'd love to implement. And as a result of that, they usually implement nothing because if everything is important, nothing is important. And when it becomes important enough for them to address one specific thing to get it done, that's when we can do great work together.
I love it. So when it comes to business of that size and level of complexity, if you want to put it that way, are you working more on honing in on the founders' ideas, their visions, and kind of going, okay, let's put blinders on the stallion, let's go this way? Is it leadership skills? Is it how to get all of those million ideas out of themselves and into the minds of their employees so that they can all move forward? What is the dynamics of that?
All right, couple of things. First of all, things that go a little counter to what most business organization training and so forth is like. Entrepreneurs are their own weird owl. Okay. They usually do not play that well with others. What drives them is very different from what drives, say, a manager or an employee. There are people like us who live on what we can produce, what we can sell. And there are people who get a check or a deposit every 2 weeks, and they're called W-2s, sometimes 1099s. The way that person thinks and the way the owner of a business thinks is often vastly different, and there are huge communications issues. People who are founders and salespeople are not typically very good managers, and they're usually the first to admit that. So there are initially issues of communication. Sometimes did they make the right hires for positions within their companies? More often than not, they have a really great employee or several that they had hired. In other words, that their instincts were good, but they're too controlling. And there's a good reason for a founder owner to be controlling. They usually created the business because they came from an environment where they didn't have control, that was chaotic. Sometimes, usually, it goes back to adolescence, early adulthood, where there was a crisis that they went through, and they made the decision they were never going to be vulnerable in that way again. And the best way in America not to be vulnerable is to make a crap ton of money, because the more money you have, the more money you make, the more the rest of the world will tolerate you, as long as you're vaguely within the confines of the law. So what has happened
I'm
is,
totally quoting that.
you go right ahead. It's true. Well, it's like the old joke, the difference between a nut and an eccentric is $2 million.
Exactly.
And in this case, it's people who are like that usually have come up with all these great ideas. They really need to sit down and have somebody supportive sift through all of them, consider all of them, and say which is the best one that can be monetized the fastest for the biggest reward, that is related to your business. In other words, it's not a diversion, it's not tangential. And once that's determined, who do you need working with you, preferably on your staff, to support this? And very often it's a matter of, will you give them the autonomy to run with this project, especially if the project is not going to interfere with other important work that has to be done with the organization. And I have found repeatedly that one person who's the employee is saying the equivalent of glory, hallelujah. I really wanted to have some leeway. I would love to take something like this on. And that can be a revelation. The other key is never, ever, ever try to change anybody, because you are wasting your time and you are ultimately going to frustrate the other person. For the most part, a successful person is not going to change because they're successful. Who am I to say you need to change? You're the one that makes enough money to give me a large payment. Or as I've described it to people, give me a lot of money so I can tell you to go to hell. And that's a large part of being, as you talked about it, honest about what is or isn't going to work. So the point is, within the parameters of who you are and what made you terrific and successful, what are the few changes or tweaks that we could make that would have a significant improvement and make you feel better about it?
Nice.
And that's usually when it comes to realizing the one great idea. And as you said earlier, putting the blinders on so that the other noise doesn't interfere with that.
Nice. So can you give us an example of a Cinderella story of a client that you've worked with?
Well, I can give you an example of a client that I had worked with and have worked with for years, where they were hiring one of their second or third assistants. And they wanted me involved in the project, in the interviews and so forth. So in the course of the interview, this candidate was really, really good, or seemed to be. Do you have any other questions? Jim, what would you pose? And I looked at the candidate and I said, you realize, of course, that this person is completely and totally out of their mind. And my client started to laugh a little. And I said, I am serious. This person is out there. Can you work with somebody who's like that? Yeah, I could. Well, that's good. Oh, by the way, in case you didn't know, that person is going to be in 1,000 different directions, and you're going to get tons and tons of conflicting requests that you're going to have to sort through. Are you going to be okay with this? Yeah, I'm going to be okay with it. Am I being accurate? And the person said, yeah, you're being accurate. And the client was smiling a little bit. And I said, by the way, you understand, of course, that they're nuts. Yeah, that's. And I said, excuse me for a minute, could you get up? And the person got up, and we went out in the corridor of this company. And I just said, by the way, Harry here is going to work for Sam. And people came running over, extending their condolences. You poor thing, you're young, you have your life ahead of you. Why would you do this? But the point is that this person, this candidate, became a valuable member of the team because we started from a point of honesty to the point of
Right.
ridiculousness, but it wasn't really ridiculous. So there was no pretension of, I expect you to do this and so forth. The real stumbling block was going to be, can I get into this person's head who acts like Taz, the Tasmanian devil, in 1,000 different directions?
Nice. I love it. And I do find that in the interviewing process, people are very uncertain about what kind of questions they can ask somebody, and kind of leery about what kind of information they can tell somebody. And to me, as a business owner, I have to know that they can deal with the chaos that is. Like, depending on the phase of a business, initially it's going to be chaotic. We're going to be throwing stuff against the wall. We're going to tell you this needs to be done yesterday, and then 2 weeks from now we're going to ditch it and it's not going to get done, and you're going to be doing something else. And you got to be able to accept that. In a different phase of business, you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again until you want to throw up because it works, and that's just the way it goes. Like, you have to be able to understand, I think, where your business is at, and how to relay that to the person so that you're getting the right person. Like in this case, you wanted somebody that has 8 arms of an octopus, 6 eyes, and loves putting things in order. that's that's got to be their MO. Otherwise, there's no way they'd be able to handle that entrepreneur. But I'm assuming that knowing that, they thrived.
One of the things I had found, Michelle, years ago, I ran a division of a company. And my main question in an interview was, what was the most difficult and challenging project you ever had in business or in life? And what did you do to make it through? How did you fix it? And there was a young man who was interviewing me once, straight out of college. And this was for a marketing position. And he said that he had been working with a roofing crew the previous summer and had to stop a nail gun fight. Well, this person was fairly short, maybe 120 pounds, dripping wet. And after that description, I just said, "You're hired, show up Monday." And the person said, "Well, what do you mean? Aren't you going to go through the points of my resume?" And I said, "You just graduated school. None of that shit means anything. You're going to learn it all on the job. But anybody who could stop a nail gun fight, who is your size, is somebody who's going to be great in this job." And this person was.
Nice. Who knew? Everybody's CVs are going to change from now.
Well, everybody, as you know, you can't teach attitude, and you cannot teach ambition. Anything else can be learned, and unfortunately, so many choices are made based upon somebody's experience, and the experience might not necessarily be worthwhile. And I'll give you another example is, I had made the mistake of hiring a number of people who came from an organization that had a completely poisonous environment, horrible poisonous environment. And I made the mistake of hiring these folks because they had great individual expertise in certain areas. The problem is they also brought the poisonous attitude that they had, which was dishonesty, being duplicitous about what they are doing, playing games with pitting people against one another, uh, and other things of that nature that might have been appropriate in this previous environment, but were doing serious damage to the organization I was in.
No, that's not good. That's I think it was IBM that in the 80s, it was maybe even earlier, that said that we hire the best. It's through their experience. And then within like a decade, it was like, we hire people for the attitude, and they have the best attitudes. And realizing that, hey, experience is, you're going to learn this, because in that world, you couldn't know your job. Like, you have experience that will lead you to make good decisions moving forward, but you couldn't possibly know what the job was because everything was new. It's like, we've
Well, it
never done
also
this
comes
before. Kind
down
of like
to,
today.
yeah, it comes down to a question that I ask: are you an investor or a speculator? Most people will say investor, most people are speculators. And by a speculator, I'll give you an example with hiring. Would I hire somebody who does not have direct experience and train them? Well, I'm making an investment in that person, and it isn't necessarily going to begin to pay for me immediately. Am I a speculator, meaning am I going to hire based upon resume and existing experience as the main focus, knowing that, hoping that this person's going to take their brain, they're going to hit the ground running, they're going to do all these amazing things, and I don't have to invest a lot in this relationship. Well, the point is how are you building your organization if you're not investing in it? If I'm not investing in people and giving them the time and giving them the opportunities to grow and nurture the relationship, well, I shouldn't expect loyalty.
Right. Well,
Okay.
and how can you build a business on that unless you're doing something that's already been done? Like unless I'm selling cookies off the shelf. Like I don't see how you could run a company that has any degree of let's call it nuance to it. Like the culture's going to be different, you would think. I would think should be different.
Mhm.
But talk to me about your opinion of that because oftentimes that can be a um oh, I don't know, sour bomb in a business. Like what the hell are you thinking? Why are you, are you reinventing something that's already existing?
Why are you reinventing it? And do you want to avoid the phrase beginning, well, at X company, we did this?
Right.
Sometimes what happened at X company might be helpful. Very often it's cultural.
Hmm.
And that's where the danger, arises. I am far more in the camp of making the investment and letting somebody have the opportunity to develop significantly, because then it's going to be a development within my company's culture.
Right. Nice. I love it. I love it. I know our listeners are going to want more from you. How did they start that journey with you?
Well, first of all, they can visit me at my website, which is www.elsinoreба.com. That's ELSINOREBA.com. They can email me at JIMS at elsinoreба.com. They can send me a text to 610 908 9087. Although, if they do that, I hope they identify themselves so I don't think it's Verizon trying to sell me another package that I don't need.
Love it. I love it. We will, of course, have all of Jim's links in the show notes. So go ahead and scroll down, find those links, click on a new browser, of course, because we're not done yet. So, Jim, I get to ask you, at what point in life did you know that you weren't going to die because somebody offended you or because you were offending others?
Well, I was very lucky. I grew up in a home where my parents were both comedy writers. And a
What?
lot of the things that they wrote, or the dining room table or the kitchen table at night, was very often the time that they would try out material. And when I say they were both writers, my mother sometimes was the one that had absolutely stiletto sharp barbs, but she was considered a homemaker in that era. So I would sometimes get in trouble by repeating what I had heard at the kitchen table when I was in school, especially when they were writing material for Friars roasts, which was, let's put it this way, not able to be televised for the real ones.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so I
That
live to
had to
tell
have
that
been
I live to tell that tale. And it also comes down to, Michelle, the whole idea, if you can make money, the world is willing to put up with a lot.
fair enough.
If you can be successful, and a perfect example is if you go online and you read the news and for a week, and you're going to see stories about many different billionaires who are behaving terribly by middle class standards. And then a couple of people might say tisk tisk, but most people will just nod and say it's part of their makeup because they're brilliant and they're successful. No, they have a crap ton of money. You wish you had as much money as that, and you figure maybe the solution is to be a complete asshole. Well, that attracts people, doesn't attract a lot of other people.
Fair enough. Well, and on that note, I think it's paramount to understand going back to your initial comments of understanding the difference between human rights and offensiveness.
Mhm.
And there's a huge chasm between those two things. Being told that you're not doing your job properly at work is not an offense to your human rights. It's being told that you just got to get the job done. This is how this goes on. So I think that's immensely important. Any other tips for that one?
Yeah, and let's go. Are you in agreement of what doing the job right is done right is?
Fair enough.
Because there can be many different interpretations, including are you able to act effectively as a colleague with the people around you? Sometimes that's very important for an organization, sometimes less so.
And sometimes maybe you're just meant to be an entrepreneur. Maybe you got
And
to look at the writing
the
on the
other
wall.
part, Michelle, is once you've been an entrepreneur, you better figure out how to make it work because you'll probably never be hired by anyone again
Exactly.
because you know too much.
You, you've been absolutely awesome. Any last words for our peeps?
Entrepreneurship is not for everyone, and if somebody says they can teach entrepreneurship, they're full of shit.
That's awesome. Uh, Jim, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and I know how valuable it is.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks again.
Awesome. Peeps, this is Michelle Nedlick. Thank you for being here with us today. Be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your friends. We love helping entrepreneurs grow. And keep in mind, we're happy to offend you.